They say that Chuck Norris built the hospital that he was born in. And right after he was born, he carried his mother out of the delivery room. He seasons his food with pepper spray and gargles jet fuel. The legend is loud, but the man behind it, even louder. He served in the U.S. Air Force. He became 6-time world karate champion. And when Hollywood came knocking, he didn't just answer. He kicked the door off the hinges. He went from airman to icon, from martial artist to internet demigod. Chuck Norris became the man you never wanted to fight, not even in your dreams. But behind every unstoppable man is a lineage just as fierce. His ancestors lived through war, hardship, and revolution. Their stories weren't in scripts. They were carved into the American experience, quietly, powerfully, and for generations. I am Dairen Castro Torres, the genealogist, and what you're about to see is not a meme, it's a legacy. Let's follow the real story behind the man, the myth, the legend. This is the genealogy of Chuck Norris. His birth name was Carlos Ray Norris, a newborn baby listed on this 1940 U.S. Census in Blackburn Township, Jefferson County, Oklahoma. His father, Ray D. Norris, was a mechanic, and his mother is Wilma Sue Scarberry. By 1950, the family relocated to Castro County. Ray is now a truck driver, and Wilma, Chuck's mother, is working as a waitress. And Carlos Ray is only 10 years old, and you can see right here it says rock crusher for the industry that his father worked in. But in reality, that's what young Chuck Norris did for fun. We'll begin with his maternal line. Wilma Sue Scarberry was just an 8-year-old girl listed in the 1930 census of Castro County, Oklahoma. Her father, John Porter Scarberry, labored in the pipelines. Her mother, Agnes Hargrove, kept a home. They lived in Winston Township, and the photo is from 1957, and his mother is smiling from the pages of the Wilson High School yearbook. Her parents married on June 16, 1908 in Ardmore, Oklahoma. John Porter Scarberry is 22 years old and a laborer, and his wife is just 18 years old, Ada Hargrove. She was born in Texas but raised on the Oklahoma frontier. The 1900 U.S. Census gives us two families living miles apart, yet destined to be joined. On the top is Wichita County, Oklahoma, and it's the Scarberry household. John Porter Scarberry is just 14 years old and living with his parents, Richard and Eliza. But we'll come back to the Scarberry line a little bit later. On the bottom is the Hargrove family in nearby Custer County, and we have Ada Hargrove as the child of Jace Hargrove and Jemamie Phillips. On April 15, 1920, in Mount Pleasant, Texas, Jemamie Hargrove took her final breath. She was 50 years old, a housewife, a mother, and a daughter of Tennessee. Her husband, J.E. or Jace Hargrove, signed as the informant. Her father was Cullen Buford Phillips and her mother, Mary McKinman. In 1880, deep in the heart of Texas, the Phillips family appeared in the census records of Cook County. The head of the household was Cullen Buford Phillips, a farmer. His wife, Mary Jane, a homemaker who was born in Kentucky. And among their children was a 10-year-old Haystraw J, who would grow up to be known as Jemamie. In the spring of 1862, the Mississippi River didn't flow with water alone. It churned with smoke, ironclads, and the bones of men who believed they could stop the war with a shovel and a prayer. This was Island Number 10, a sliver of land carved by the river's wrath and occupied by Confederate hopes. A natural fortress, or so they thought. Federal gunboats crept into the channel like sharks, their black hulls silent until they opened fire. The roar shattered the dark. Fire rained sideways. The 46th Tennessee Infantry was there. Young men, farmers, teachers, dreamers. Sucked into the storm they couldn't escape. The lines broke. Men dug in, ran, or lay down to die. The island became a coffin in its own making. But not everyone stayed buried. One of them made it out, by mud, blood, and of the thinnest breath of luck. His name was Cullen Buford Phillips, a 3rd Lieutenant, Confederate survivor. He escaped the moment his regiment surrendered and vanished into history. This Cullen Phillips served as 3rd Lieutenant in the 46th Tennessee Infantry. His regiment was captured after the fall of Island No. 10, a brutal Union siege along the Mississippi River. But Cullen, he escaped, slipped past the lines, dodged prison camps, walked away from one of the Confederacy's worst defeats, and lived to tell it. It wasn't just courage, it was survival. As promised, we are back at the Scarberry line, and standing to the left is the before-mentioned John Porter Scarberry, the maternal grandfather of Chuck Norris. And seated to the right is his father, Richard Scarberry, and he was also a Confederate soldier in the Civil War. Richard Scarberry served in Company F in the 4th Tennessee Cavalry, and it was called Murray's Regiment. His wife, Eliza Jane Smith, is seated on the left. In 1850, 18-year-old Eliza Jane Smith is living with her family in Rowan County, Tennessee, living on the farm of her father, George Preston Smith, and her mother, Lucy Kimberlin Narramore. This entry comes from the Daughters of the American Revolution lineage book, a series used to verify ancestral connections during the American Revolution. It outlines the direct descent beginning with George Preston Smith and his wife Lucy Kimberlin Narramore, and it says Lucy was the daughter of John Narramore and Nancy Adkins. John Narramore, a Revolutionary War soldier and Chuck Norris's 3rd great-grandfather. Raised in the heart of South Carolina, John was just 17 when he was drafted into the war that would birth this nation. Substituting for his father, Edward Narramore, he joined Captain John Marshall's company. They marched towards the East Savannah River, 30 miles above Savannah. They joined General Lincoln's command. This wasn't just local defense, it was war. The Tories were emboldened, the swamps full of ambush. But John stood firm. For months of marching, raiding, and survival earned him the rank of corporal. His company moved with precision under General Pulaski. John fulfilled his post. When discharged, he returned home a patriot, but not for long. Just weeks later, he re-enlisted, now fighting under Captain William Kimball. He witnessed the brutal tactics of loyalist raiders, homes torched, churches plundered, families uprooted. When his own father's house was burned, John took his musket and joined the ranks again, no longer fighting for independence. He was fighting for revenge. 50 years later, the U.S. government acknowledged his sacrifice. In 1833, John Narramore received a pension for his revolutionary service. John's legacy would pass through his daughter, Lucy Kimberlin Narramore, to Eliza Smith, and eventually to Chuck Norris. From revolution to retribution to roundhouse kicks, this bloodline of resistance runs deep. From the heartland of Oklahoma, we now shift from the maternal line to the paternal. This headstone application marks the military legacy of Ray D. Norris, father of Carlos Ray Norris. Born in 1918 and enlisted in 1944, Ray Norris served as a private in Company K of the 39th Infantry during World War II, and he was honorably discharged in May of 1945. These two census records, 1920 and 1930, place us in the heart of rural Texas and Oklahoma, where James Henry Norris and Ella Mae Tinker raised their family, strong sons on hardworking soil. In between is a family photograph that captures the 6 brothers, Kenneth, Henry, Harlan, Lawrence, Marshall, and Ray all the way to the right. These were the sons of the Great Depression, farmhands, laborers, dreamers. The photo on the left captures a quiet moment between the parents, James Henry Norris and his wife Ella Mae Tinker, but their story didn't end on the farm. The article to the right was clipped from the Daily Oklahoman, and it tells of Ella's mysterious death in 1952. She vanished while traveling by train to visit one of her sons in California. Days later, her body was found beside the tracks in Arizona. She was 76, a grandmother of 32, and great-grandmother to 14. The paper confirms her as the widow of J.H. Norris and mother to her son Ray, living then in California. This page from the 1860 U.S. Census shows young James Henry Norris, just 5 years old, living with his family in Rock County, Tennessee. His father, William R. Norris, listed as a 30-year-old farmer, head of household. His mother, Eliza Jane Timpson, appears beside him at the age of 25. As war has a way of splitting more than just a nation, sometimes it splits families. This pension index card comes from William R. Norris, a Tennessean who served in Company D of the 2nd Tennessee Infantry, fighting for the Union in the American Civil War. Decades later, his widow, Eliza, filed for a pension, a quiet acknowledgement of his service. Chuck Norris's ancestors fought against each other in the Civil War. This 1952 Tennessee death certificate belongs to George Washington Norris, the son of William R. Norris and the brother of James Henry Norris. But if you look at box 16, it lists Eliza Jane Timpson as the mother. In American genealogy, death certificates like this are often the key to unlocking a woman's identity, because historically, when a woman married, she lost her original maiden name. But before she was ever listed as the wife of a Norris, Eliza Jane was a Timpson by birth, and her father, John Timpson, was a man with a remarkable story. So we'll start at the beginning. This clipping comes from the Raleigh Register dated January 31st, 1837, a legislative digest of North Carolina's Privacy Acts. If you look closely at item number 7, you'll see the relief of John Timpson, a native Cherokee Indian. This was a public recognition written into state law, naming John Timpson as a Cherokee man, a man living in the shadow of Indian removal, yet still rooted in North Carolina. This act marked a moment of legal exception and survival, and it begins our journey into the complex world that John Timpson inhabited, part Cherokee, part American, fully endangered. This is the 1935 census of the Cherokee Nation in North Carolina, the final roll before the Trail of Tears. In the lower right, under the Big Creek District, one name stands out, John Timpson. 8 souls in his household, Cherokee lives, counted just before their world turned upside down. This record confirms what oral traditions and later documents echo, that John Timpson was not just a man caught between cultures. He was born into a Cherokee family that remained in North Carolina even as others were forced west. In this 1840 edition of the Asheville Messenger, his name emerges from the shadows of Cherokee history, John Timpson. Described here as a former member of the Cherokee Council, Timpson was tasked with a grave responsibility, to carry a message to his people. He was instructed to inform the Cherokee who remained in the East that the United States government would supply them with all things necessary for removal to the West, but only if they chose to go willingly. The article cites the Act of 1837, stressing that any funds for removal could only be used if the Cherokee left on their own accord without coercion. John Timpson, once a leader amongst his people, stood as go-between, caught between homeland and exile, between survival and sovereignty. This is the Dairen Roll of 1851, a Cherokee census compiled after the forced removals. John Timpson appears once more. Here he is listed in entry 1061, still residing in North Carolina, marked as the head of household at age 44. The remarks column notes, wife Lucy died May 4, 1841, Eliza Jane Timpson's mother. This census wasn't just a count, it was a reckoning. Each line on this page marks survival, separation, or loss in the wake of the Trail of Tears. The life of John Timpson, Cherokee leader, farmer, landholder, came to a violent end on a Saturday night in 1856. This newspaper clipping tells the story. Timpson, described as a civilized Indian in good standing and responsibility, was murdered in his own home in Cherokee County, North Carolina. Two men approached his door and demanded entry. Timpson, ever cautious, opened it with his gun in hand, but one of the intruders fired first, striking him in the arm and chest. He died within 2 hours. Though not yet proven, some suspected the killers were Indians from Arkansas, driven by an old grudge. A leader, a landowner, a veteran of diplomacy and survival, and in the end, a casualty of unresolved fractures left by war, removal, and betrayal. In the wake of John Timpson's murder, justice was not forgotten. This 1857 proclamation from North Carolina Governor Thomas Bragg placed a $600 bounty on the heads of 3 fugitives, Goldman Bryson, Archibald Murphy, and John Mush Ice, also known as John Arkansas. The 3 men had been indicted by the Superior Court of Cherokee County for Timpson's murder. According to the governor, they had since escaped beyond state lines. Of the 3, Goldman Bryson stood out. Born around 1819 in the mountains of western North Carolina, Bryson was described as tall, fair-skinned, and with dark hair and striking white teeth. He was noted for his profanity and quick tongue, slim, wiry, and always dressed to the collar. He came from a settler family that had long lived in the proximity of the Cherokee. Some accounts suggest that he had ties to the natives and white communities, navigating the margins of both worlds, often as a laborer, trader, and occasional enforcer. But by 1857, Goldman Bryson was a wanted man. Whether driven by old grudges, political motives, or personal vengeance, he and his accomplices had crossed the line, and the state was prepared to pay handsomely for their capture. Timpson's murder and the manhunt that followed offer a window into a violent and unsettled frontier, a place where old treaties were broken, the lines of race and loyalty were blurred, and even the respected could fall victim to revenge. Goldman Bryson's final chapter reads like a closing act in a long-running tragedy of mountain justice. Once a wanted man for the murder of Cherokee leader John Timpson, Bryson had vanished into the wilds of North Carolina, but he didn't stay hidden. By the time of the Civil War, he had re-emerged as Captain Goldman Bryson, leading a notorious band of irregular fighters in the rugged hills of Cherokee County. His reputation as a bushwhacker, raider, and outlaw made him a marked man once again, this time by Confederate forces. On November 11, 1863, Thomas's Cherokee Legion, a unit of native soldiers commanded by Colonel William H. Thomas, launched a surprise assault on Bryson's camp near Missionary Ridge. Led by Lieutenant C.H. Taylor, himself of Cherokee descent, the Cherokee soldiers attacked with precision. Bryson was killed. His entire command was either captured or scattered. This was a wild moment. A man once hunted for killing a Cherokee elder, now fighting for the Union, brought down finally by Cherokee soldiers fighting for the Confederacy. Goldman Bryson's life was a reflection of the frontier, complex, violent, and ultimately consumed by the chaos he helped create. The story of Chuck Norris isn't just Hollywood, it's American history, raw, tangled, and proud. It's cowboys and Indians. It's the blood of a Cherokee elder who stood his ground and died for it. It's Union blue and Confederate gray drawn across family lines and stitched back together in time. From the foothills of North Carolina to the battlefields of the Civil War. From a log cabin to a movie set. This is what it means to carry America in your DNA. Because this isn't just Chuck's story. It's the story of America.